sure. And even though Emily tried to make this look better, I have to take the blame for this being a little bit of a weird slide. So if if you've
she can only do so much for you.
She can only do so much.
Welcome everyone to this episode of Ask Praxis. Today's topic is the business use case around managing your organization's quick links in your intranet. As usual, our team is all here. We have, well, actually our team minus Todd is here today. And we have lots of opinions and insight we'll offer on this very topic. So our agenda is we're going to talk about the current state and limitations of SharePoint out of the box. And then we're going to take a maturity model approach to the various solutions. So we're going to start with an out of the box list. Then we're going to go to out of the box list with column and view formatting. And then we're going to do some very Julie-centric topics around building solutions on top of SharePoint that we're going to call an organizational tool application. We have a light version and a more robust version, and we'll go through those ideas as well. So diving right in, Emily Mancini, take it away.
So we usually run into this most when we're building intranets, but there are definitely a lot of use cases where you are also going to run into this on your team sites. So essentially what we're talking about is this idea that your intranet is your entry point to all of your different company tools and resources. Now, this is where our language gets a little funny because this can mean a lot of things. It may be an external website. It might be another external solution that you're linking to. It could even be some custom applications that you made in your environment. But there's this idea that we have a subset of content and we need to bring people to it. Now, when we're linking to those external applications, let's say that our organization uses maybe Workday for some of our finance and human resources people management, and there's specific tasks I have to go to Workday to use. You're going to be manually putting in all of those links within SharePoint and maybe even on tabs and Teams. We don't really have central management of that. So let's say our organization decides maybe we're not going to use Workday anymore. Maybe we're switching to Oracle. Now you need to go find all of those different links and manually change them. Very often, we also have one central tool owner, let's say, and some supporting tool content. And then that is a little bit disconnected. The links may be over here. Maybe the support content is in a site over here. People have to know to then find it. So if everything is being manually done, it's hard to track down. What are some other options that we have for really centralizing, making it scalable and sustainable to link to all of these other external tools, resources, applications that we're using in our day-to-day at our organization?
I think this is one of the most popular things we hear about in the intranets that we build for our customers is this need to like manage links in some way, shape, or form, put some governance around it. So with that note, Mark Anderson, do you want to dive into what our maturity model approach is going to be?
Sure. And even though Emily tried to make this look better, I have to take the blame for this being a little bit of a weird slide. So if if you've
she can only do so much for you.
She can only do so much. So if you've been to any of our maturity model practitioner calls or you've been to other Ask Praxis, you know that sometimes we haul out a similar slide to this where we talk about the different maturity levels that might lead you to do things in different ways. There's nothing wrong with using a quick links web part if it accomplishes what you need. And in fact, most of the intranets we do, that's exactly what we're doing on most, say, department homepages. Those links are manually managed by the site owners. They don't know how many people are clicking on them or anything, but they get people from where they are to where they need to go. If you want a little more flexibility, sort of going up the maturity level, you can start to use list-based content, which you could build in things like active versus inactive. You could build in some sort of Power Automate flows that would, hey, Todd's here, that would help you put things through an approval process, et cetera, et cetera. And that would give you another sort of mechanism to manage the content that's in those links. And then if you really want to think about links or, getting from one place to another from an enterprise standpoint, you're probably needing to look at a more sophisticated solution, especially if you want to monitor the use of those links across your intranet or across your tenant, or you want to suggest links to people or let them save links that are most valuable to them. Then you're looking at sort of a higher level of maturity and complexity.
Cool.
Click.
So yeah, so let's start, I guess, then about talking about the very most basic, right? So the out of the box list idea.
Yeah. So, most people know how quick links work. So we didn't want to actually show, here's the out of the box quick links, but you could use a list with a hyperlink column just to store your links. And I've got some very important and useful links like CNN, Microsoft, and weather.com there. So you could set up a simple list that's got a title, a link, or that actually contains the URL and the display text, and then maybe toss in a fancy column like active, yes or no, and just filter that view that you're showing on the home page to only show links that are active. So right there, you're starting to think about those links more as a content management problem than a content, just editing the home page every time you need some help, or you need to make a change. They go into the into the list, and you can again put a little bit of smartness around those links. But if you think about it, that doesn't it doesn't look all that pretty. It doesn't really add any much value other than the fact that you can manage them a little bit better. So if you go to the next slide, and by the way,
and
these links,
yeah.
Yep. So if you do go to a list-based approach, and you don't use any sort of search-based solution. So for example, PnP Modern Search web parts are great to pull things from across your sites. Then you're probably limited to the list that the site where the list is actually stored. So it's more of a point solution, even and it doesn't improve upon that from the quick links web part.
Yeah, but I think it's important to point that out. So
yep, and I almost forgot.
We're going to do some formatting, I guess.
Right.
Mark?
So if you don't like the way that sort of just lists view looks in your home page, you could certainly use some column formatting or some view formatting to make them look nicer. And so if you look where you've got simple links at the top, then we got a little bit fancier links. We wrap them in a little colored box. We can even have a little bit of intelligence in that JSON formatting that updates that click count column. So every time I click on CNN, that click count is actually incremented. But again, you're only knowing that people are clicking on CNN in that one particular site, in that one particular instance. Still a little bit better than what you get with the out of the box, and it certainly can give you a little bit more information about what people are actually using. On the right side, you can see that there are some fancier ways that you could then use view formatting to actually show those links. So if you have more of a design focus around those links and you want to make them look a certain way, those are two examples that came from the PnP column formatting samples that might be appealing to you in order to make the links look nicer. One of the things that we are restricted by with the out-of-the-box quick links web part is we only have a very small number of options for the display. Here we have a lot more flexibility, and we can really devise something that would make things look the way you want them to. And again, probably still also in the same site collection. You can centralize the formatting a little bit with some source control, but you're still dealing with content that lives in one particular site unless you use search.
So there's some conversation going on in the chat. So Mark Crispin just asking a general question about the maturity model, using them in presentations or documents. I don't really know the answer to that one. Maybe Mark or Emily does.
Yes, slide rights question.
Any rights considerations, meaning using anything that's on the maturity model documentation and stuff like that? I think the answer is no, there is no issue. I mean, all of this is open source concept, so feel free to reuse and borrow, and if you want to make it sound cooler, you can steal it.
Even though you spell Mark incorrectly, you are still able to.
Well, that's why I almost didn't answer. It's wrong. Yeah.
And then Krista was asking about the click count option. So those are list and JSON formatting things. And there's links in the bottom, although apparently the honeycomb link is not working. We can paste that into the chat. Well, you can't fix it live because it won't update.
Yeah, I know.
Maybe you could paste it in the chat.
I can fix it. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, there are some great examples of the kinds of things you can do. Odds are you would probably, sort of take one of these things and customize it. But lots of good resources out there for stuff like that.
Yeah, the JSON formatting is some really cool. It was one of the better features they added to lists and libraries, is the ability to do some of that formatting. It really does make the lists and libraries even more powerful as a data tool. All right, so now we're going to move on with more of the things that I do on a regular basis, which is to build sort of solutions on top of SharePoint that we can surface inside of the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. So we're going to start with this first idea, which we'll call an organizational tools application, and we're going to call it the Lite idea. And so the Lite idea is that we would use a list, a SharePoint list, and it could be in a site collection, maybe ideally like hidden sort of, or not navigatable from the menus, in like maybe the root site of your organization or something like that. And what we would do with that list is we give all users in our organization, and that's why I was suggesting maybe the root site or the home site, because that's one where usually all users have access at some level. And we would change the list permissions to give all users contribution rights to the list. And then what we would do is use something like SharePoint Framework Form Customizer, which is a newer feature of the SharePoint Framework, to build custom new edit and view forms where we build in some security considerations. So essentially, when the user comes to the form, because they would have the ability to create a new one or edit an existing one, we can determine who they are and then change the way the form looks or what the form says based on those security principles that we can sort of determine as we're rendering the form. And so then we'd use a column like a status or an approval column to then provide some moderation, so that if you're in a group of users where you have the rights to approve a tool in the list, then you would see some UX where you would be able to do that step. And then of course we could build some custom web parts, one or more depending on what you need, to give visualization to that content and that list. And because we're building those web parts custom, they can cross the site boundaries. And because the permissions for who can see everything is set so broadly so that everybody can see every item in the list, that's going to work. So some of the considerations here is that we still have a limited set of analytics that we can build around those list items, because we're not talking about a sort of a relational database structure here. We can only really provide summary metrics around each of those list items, like click count or favorited count, if you like maybe put a favorite feature in your web part, or a pinned count, or some other kind of metric that you might want to put on it. And then of course this security is security by obscurity. We're managing what a user can do through the UX, but that doesn't prohibit them from being able to use JavaScript or PowerShell to modify those list items. In the grand scheme of things, probably organizational tools is not something you'd worry too much about, but it is a consideration. So this has a lower creation cost than some of the other option I'm going to sort of talk through, but it doesn't have any monthly maintenance costs. Once you build it, it would work, and other than probably wanting to yearly take a look at it and just make sure everything is up to snuff and nothing's going wrong, it in general doesn't have any maintenance costs. We had a question from Mike. So Mike is asking, would the SharePoint Framework Form Customizer be an okay place for someone to start with no SharePoint Framework experience? It's fairly advanced. The web part is probably an easier place for somebody to start that wants to start coding with SharePoint Framework. I mean, you need to know how to build a JavaScript-based or TypeScript-based solution to do the SharePoint Framework. So it is not a power user kind of solution. That's for sure. Okay, so just to give sort of that visualization of what this looks like, this would be sort of an example of what a form might look like. So you'd have fields for the various list item field columns, and you can provide a custom user interface. Note on the right side there, we have that tool admins only, and that field is disabled unless the security of the form figures out that you are in the right group and you have the ability to change the tool's status. So that's an example of what a form might look like. And then to sort of drill in a little bit more, here's some examples of various visualizations. So on the right top, we have an implementation where we're saying, oh, okay, we have a custom web part where we maybe provide some search functionality so we can search against the items in that list, maybe because we put a content type in that list for all the tool items. And so then we can actually use SharePoint search to search against the items in that list. And we might use, in this case, like organization is a MMS field or a taxonomy field that we'd use other places. So all the tools would get tagged with a particular organizational location or some other kind of metadata, like maybe there's a list of departments and you want to tag tools to a particular department or some other aspect like that. So we'd have that ability and the ability to like add like information page. So if you have a resource, but then you have something like a training page where it talks about like how to use like Salesforce is one of your links, and then you have a page about using Salesforce in your organization as like an informational link, we could provide two links and then surface them so that users could see information about a particular tool. That can also be super helpful. Another visualization is the bottom there where we had a tiles layout and a compact layout and a list layout. So mimicking some of the quick links looks, but adding a hover experience, for instance, where we have more details about the tool, that we can have an expanded description. We can have a little icon there for favoriting the tool so that we could have maybe a My Tools experience, which would be maybe another separate web part. So there's a lot of functionality that we could imagine and build in, expanding the sort of maturity of this information. So now if I move forward and we talk about the not so light version of it, now we're getting into the idea where instead of using a list and doing that sort of security by obscurity thing, we're going to actually take all of that information outside of Microsoft 365 and move into Azure realm. So we'd maybe make like use table storage in Azure or maybe a SQL Server database. We'd add something like App Insights, which is the ability to track all sorts of information about like who the users are, what locations they're coming from, all sorts of metadata. Think all the ways that maybe the intranet tracks you. We could track the users' interactions with our tools. So a lot more metrics could be tracked and saved, like where was this tool added? So if you had a web part that was available throughout your entire SharePoint tenant and people put it on their various pages, you could maybe get a list of where a particular tool was pinned, all the URLs of all the pages where a particular tool was pinned, so that you can kind of see metrics on how popular the tools are. If you want to remove a tool, maybe see how many places it's pinned so you know whether or not that's one that's highly used by your organization or not highly used, etc. So there's a lot of extensive analytics and things that you can do when you take the SharePoint list piece out of it. And then, so how you would surface that information is you'd have this either table storage or SQL Server storage, and then you'd build your own API on top of it. And so that API works just like the SharePoint APIs, but you would be able to manage the security to the list items through it by the security that you can wrap around Azure resources. And so then again, you'd build this custom SharePoint framework solution maybe, or a separate SPA application. SPA stands for single page application. It would be like a web page itself that would be, have its own URL and be the thing to add, edit, request tools. And so that could be a whole user experience in and of itself. Instead of just a very simple list interface for like a new form, you could have a whole workflow around it. You could get much more extensive on how the user interface is for creating tools, managing tools, all of that kind of thing. This would also then provide you the ability to do some multilingual capabilities that you really can't do with lists out of the box in SharePoint. We have multilingual capabilities around pages, but we don't really have multilingual capabilities around list items. And so the idea that this more extensive version could allow you to put in translations for like the title and the description and things like that, and maybe have a different URL based on language, because some sites or like documentation have different URLs for the various language variations. So we could provide that kind of capability in a more mature solution like this. We can also then, as we did before, create our own custom visualizations, various web parts for the different things. So obviously this would be a higher cost to create. And then you would also have sort of that monthly subscription cost associated with whatever resources you used in Azure or whatever cloud service that you might have considered. So that is a lot of information. Let's move forward. We've got some resources. So we have the how to use the quick links web part, and that's from Microsoft support. And we have a link for the maturity model, which is great resource, as we sort of talked about earlier. Great resource is the list formatting samples. Our friend in the PMP world, Chris Kent, does a lot of work with those list formatting samples, and it's always fun to watch him present on those. So those are good resources as well. Yeah, do we have any questions or comments? Mark put that in the chat as well, but thank you, Ruth. Yes, we do like the present in Teams feature. It is certainly more accessible. Okay, well, let's
Julie,
just.
I've got
Yes.
a question. Could we add, could we add workflow around the custom solutions? Like allowing someone to potentially submit something or, have it go through different levels?
Yeah, and you could do that in either the Lite version or the more robust version, and you could do it a lot of different ways. Certainly with the list version, there would be, and I would even advocate for this where I normally don't advocate for Power Automate flows. In the scenario where you have one central list and you are building Power Automate flows around that one list and you don't have to duplicate it or replicate it, that's a great use case for a Power Automate flow to be able to react to new list items being added to the list, and maybe you generate a whole approval workflow using Power Automate flow to approve items in the list. If you go to the more power solution, you could also use Logic Apps. That's an Azure feature. You could use Power Automate flows as well, but I believe because of the way you would have to trigger them, that they would be considered a paid premium license. So I don't know that that really buys you anything, given that you're already in Azure and Logic's apps are so inexpensive. Per run, you get hundreds of thousands of executions before you actually get charged for a Logic app run. And just for full transparency, Power Automate is just a user interface, a more user-friendly user interface on top of Logic Apps anyway. So it's the same stuff. If you've never seen it, which I'm assuming most people haven't, if you log into Azure and go to Logic Apps, the UI is a drag and drop WYSIWYG flow creation in Logic Apps. It's actually not, to me, any more difficult to do than Power Automate flows are to do. It's just harder to get to. So I would definitely think that those could be options. And of course, you could write other just cloud-based code flows, like using Azure Functions or something like that, to do more complicated workflows if that's what you feel more comfortable with. We have some comments here. Krista, many of the lists, but I haven't done much with the column specific. Oh, okay. So Krista is saying she has done a lot of the view formatting, but haven't done much with the column specific formatting options. So that is something she can look at more.
Yeah, that repo is constantly getting pull requests. I actually watch them, and there's constant movement there. So if you don't think that there's something that you need there, look again.
Yeah,
there are new ones coming in all the time, or improvements on what's already there.
And Mark Chrisman made the comment about like the screenshots on Learn are just Logic App page. Yeah, yes, that is very, very true. So awesome. So that sort of wraps up. If there's no other questions or comments, our next episode is February 8th, and we're going to talk about notifications and approvals in lists and libraries. And we're going to kind of do similar approach to today's. Also, CS Live, we're going to be in a lot of places this spring. We're back to full in person. We're going to be in force at the European Collaboration Summit in Dusseldorf, Germany. That's in end of May. It's not on here, but I will also, myself will be at the Microsoft 365 conference at the beginning of May. That's in Las Vegas, so definitely consider joining me there. Apparently there should be some good content. The Thrive conference is at the end of May as well. That's in Slovenia. I believe Mark is the only person attending that one. And
Me
then
too.
we have,
And Emily
too, sorry.
I'm not
Sorry,
going
didn't know
without
Emily was-
Emily.
Oh, well, good point. I wouldn't want to go anywhere without Emily either. And we also are in force at the 365 EduCon conference in DC, and that's in middle of June. So we are all over the place in the spring. And also, of course, if you are dev-centric at all or have friends or colleagues that are dev-centric, join myself and Andrew Connell on Cloud Dev Clarity. We have a new episode that just dropped around the State of JavaScript 2022 survey. It was a long one. It was a whole hour-long episode, but we went really deep into that survey and gave a lot of thoughts and insights. So please check that out. And as always, thank you everyone for joining us. We totally look forward to seeing you next time. If you have questions or comments, please feel free to use our form. The link is right there on the page to submit ideas for future episodes, any questions you might have, because if you do have questions, we sometimes try to use that to make like a Ask Me Anything episode. So please feel free to use it to submit your questions. We might not get to it right away, but we certainly might get to it soon. So as always, thank you for joining us and have a great rest of your day.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us this week on Ask in Praxis. We love getting your questions or session ideas. You can submit by using the link in About. If you find this helpful, hit that like or subscribe button and share this content with your colleagues. Join us again as we release new content every other Wednesday.